The morning sun cast long shadows across the military air base as Captain Sarah Mitchell performed her final equipment check. Her hands moved with practiced precision over the controls of her F-16 Fighting Falcon, each switch and button as familiar as her own heartbeat. At 28, she was one of only 12 female combat pilots in the entire Air Force, a distinction that came with both pride and constant scrutiny. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Escort General Harrison's transport plane through hostile territory to negotiate a peace treaty. The general, a decorated war hero with silver hair and kind eyes, had personally requested the best pilot available for the assignment. Sarah felt honored when her commanding officer pointed to her name on the duty roster. "Remember, Mitchell," Colonel Davis had said during the briefing, "this isn't just any diplomatic mission. General Harrison carries sensitive information that could end this conflict once and for all. Your job is to keep him safe at all costs." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She had flown dozens of combat missions, but none quite like this one. The enemy territory stretched for hundreds of miles, filled with anti-aircraft installations and patrol fighters that shot first and asked questions later. As she climbed into her cockpit, Sarah's mind wandered to her younger brother Tommy, who had been captured by enemy forces 6 months earlier. Every mission she flew carried the hope that somehow, somewhere, she might find a clue about his whereabouts. The thought gave her extra motivation to succeed. The takeoff went smoothly. Sarah's fighter plane roared down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, with General Harrison's larger transport plane following close behind. The formation looked impressive against the morning clouds, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving in warfare. For the first hour of flight, everything proceeded according to plan. Sarah maintained radio contact with both the general's pilot and ground control, reporting their position every 15 minutes. The landscape below gradually changed from friendly green fields to the scarred brown earth of the conflict zone. "Phoenix Leader to Eagle Nest," Sarah spoke into her radio, using the general's code name. "We're approaching the border. How are you holding up back there?" "Eagle Nest to Phoenix Leader," came the general's calm voice. "All systems normal. The old bird is flying steady." Sarah smiled despite the tension. The general had insisted on piloting his own transport plane, claiming that 30 years of flying experience shouldn't go to waste just because he wore stars on his uniform instead of wings on his chest. The first sign of trouble appeared on Sarah's radar screen as 3 blips moving fast from the northeast. Her training kicked in immediately, and she increased altitude while scanning the sky with her eyes. Enemy fighters were known for their aggressive tactics and superior numbers. "Eagle Nest, we have company," Sarah radioed. 3 bogies approaching from your 2 o'clock. Suggest you increase speed and altitude." "Copy that, Phoenix Leader. The old transport is giving me everything she's got." Sarah banked her fighter to position herself between the approaching enemy aircraft and the general's plane. Her heart rate increased, but her hands remained steady on the controls. This was what she had trained for during countless hours in simulators and practice flights. The enemy fighters came in fast, their sleek silver bodies glinting in the sunlight. Sarah recognized them as the latest model interceptors, faster and more maneuverable than her own aircraft. But she had something they didn't have: experience fighting against overwhelming odds. "Phoenix Leader to base," she transmitted. "Engaging 3 enemy fighters, Eagle Nest continuing to destination." The first enemy pilot made the mistake of coming straight at Sarah's fighter, probably expecting an easy victory against a lone defender. Sarah waited until the last possible moment before rolling her aircraft into a sharp diving turn that brought her behind the enemy plane. Her targeting system locked on, and she squeezed the trigger. The missile streaked through the air and found its mark. The enemy fighter exploded in a ball of orange flame, sending debris raining down toward the earth below. One down, two to go. But the remaining enemy pilots had learned from their comrades' mistake. They split up, forcing Sarah to choose which threat to engage first. She chose the one closest to the general's transport plane, knowing that protecting her primary mission took priority over her own safety. The dogfight that followed tested every skill Sarah had learned in her years of training. The enemy pilots were good, using coordinated attacks and superior speed to try to overwhelm her defenses. Sarah found herself pulling high G turns that pressed her deep into her ejection seat, the world spinning around her in a blur of blue sky and brown earth. During one particularly intense exchange, an enemy missile passed so close to Sarah's canopy that she could see the serial numbers painted on its side. Her electronic countermeasures had saved her life, but just barely. "Phoenix Leader, what's your status?" General Harrison's voice crackled through the radio, concern evident despite the static. "Still here, Eagle Nest," Sarah replied, breathing hard from the physical stress of combat maneuvering. "But these guys aren't giving up easy." Sarah managed to get a shot at the second enemy fighter, but her missile missed by mere inches. The pilot was skilled, using terrain features to mask his approach and break her targeting lock. Sarah realized she was running low on ammunition and would need to make every shot count. The third enemy pilot made his move while Sarah was focused on his partner. She saw the missile launch on her threat display and threw her fighter into a steep climb, releasing chaff and flares to confuse the incoming weapon. The missile detonated harmlessly below her aircraft, but the maneuver had cost her precious fuel. "Eagle Nest, you need to push that transport harder," Sarah called. "I can't keep this up much longer." "Already at maximum speed, Phoenix Leader. This old transport wasn't built for racing." Sarah looked at her fuel gauge and made a quick calculation. She had maybe 10 minutes of combat maneuvering left before she would need to disengage and head for home. But 10 minutes might be enough if she could outthink her opponents. She decided to use a risky tactic her flight instructor had taught her years ago. Sarah put her fighter into what appeared to be an uncontrolled dive, as if she had been hit by enemy fire. The two remaining enemy pilots took the bait, following her down to finish off what they thought was a damaged aircraft. At the last possible moment, Sarah pulled out of the dive and executed a sharp climbing turn that brought her directly behind the trailing enemy fighter. Her cannon fire stitched a line of holes across the enemy's wing, causing the pilot to break off his attack and limp away with smoke trailing from his engine. The final enemy pilot realized he was now alone against a very dangerous opponent. He made several half-hearted attack runs, but seemed more interested in surviving the encounter than pressing home his advantage. After a few minutes of cautious maneuvering, he turned and headed back toward his own territory. Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief as she watched the enemy fighter disappear into the distance. She had successfully protected the general and his crucial mission, though the cost in fuel and ammunition had been higher than expected. "Phoenix Leader to Eagle Nest," she radioed. "Threat neutralized. How much farther to the landing zone?" "About 40 minutes at current speed," the general replied. "Outstanding work up there, Captain. Remind me to recommend you for a medal when we get back." Sarah smiled. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Her fuel warning light had just illuminated, indicating that she was cutting things very close. The return journey would be even more dangerous, as enemy forces would now be alerted to their presence. As they continued toward the landing zone, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was far from over. The enemy had shown unusual determination in their attack, suggesting that General Harrison's diplomatic mission was more important than anyone had let on. The landscape below began to change again, showing signs of recent battles. Destroyed vehicles and bomb craters dotted the terrain, reminders of the brutal conflict that had been raging for months. Sarah wondered if the general's peace negotiations could really bring an end to all the suffering. "Eagle Nest, I'm showing the landing zone on my navigation display," Sarah reported. Looks clear from up here, but stay alert. This could be where they make their real move. Copy that, Phoenix Leader. Beginning descent approach. As General Harrison's transport plane started its landing approach, Sarah maintained a protective circle overhead. Her eyes constantly scanned the sky and ground for any signs of trouble. The fuel situation was becoming critical, but she would stay until the general was safely on the ground. The transport plane touched down smoothly on the small airstrip, kicking up clouds of dust in its wake. Sarah watched as ground crews rushed out to meet the aircraft, their movements quick and efficient. Everything appeared normal, but years of combat experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something felt wrong. Phoenix Leader, the general is on the ground and secure, came the radio transmission from the landing zone. You're cleared to return to base. Sarah acknowledged the transmission, but continued to circle overhead. Her fuel gauge showed less than 15 minutes remaining, barely enough to reach the nearest friendly airfield. But still, something nagged at her about the whole situation. As she prepared to turn toward home, Sarah's sharp eyes caught a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal in a grove of trees near the airstrip. Her blood turned cold as she realized what she was seeing. Enemy vehicles hidden in the forest, probably waiting for her to leave before making their move on the general. "Eagle Nest! Eagle Nest!" she called urgently into her radio. "This is Phoenix Leader. You have enemy forces positioned in the tree line to your northeast. Get the general out of there now." But there was no response from the ground. Either her radio was malfunctioning or something had happened to the general and his security team. Sarah's mind raced as she considered her options. She could head for home and report what she had seen, but by then it would be too late to help. Or she could stay and try to intervene, even though her low fuel situation made that choice extremely dangerous. Looking down at the airstrip, Sarah saw enemy soldiers emerging from the forest and advancing on the general's position. There was no time for hesitation. Despite every regulation and order about fuel reserves and mission parameters, Sarah knew what she had to do. She dove her fighter toward the enemy positions, using her remaining cannon ammunition to strafe the advancing soldiers. The attack scattered the enemy force temporarily, but Sarah knew it was only a brief reprieve. Her fuel was now critically low, and she would soon be forced to leave regardless of the situation on the ground. As she pulled up from her attack run, Sarah saw General Harrison and his aide being led away at gunpoint by enemy soldiers. Her heart sank as she realized that the entire diplomatic mission had been a trap. The enemy had never intended to negotiate. They had simply wanted to capture one of the most important military leaders in the Allied forces. With her fuel gauge now showing empty and her engine beginning to sputter, Sarah had no choice but to turn toward the nearest friendly airfield. As she flew away from the scene, she could see enemy vehicles converging on the landing zone. General Harrison was now a prisoner, and she was the only person who knew exactly what had happened. The flight back to friendly territory was the longest of Sarah's career. Her engine quit twice, forcing her to restart it each time with precious seconds of altitude to spare. She flew at minimum power settings, gliding whenever possible to conserve what little fuel remained in her tanks. When the friendly airbase finally appeared on the horizon, Sarah was flying on fumes and determination alone. Her landing was rough but successful, and ground crews rushed to her aircraft as soon as the engines spooled down. "Captain Mitchell, what's your status?" her commanding officer asked as she climbed down from the cockpit, her legs shaky from the stress and exhaustion. "General Harrison has been captured, sir," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite her emotional state. "The whole thing was a setup. They're holding him at the landing zone coordinates." Colonel Davis's face went pale. "Are you certain about this?" "I saw it happen, sir. Enemy forces were waiting in concealment. They took the general and his aide prisoner after I was forced to disengage due to fuel." As Sarah gave her detailed mission debrief, she could see the wheels turning in her commanding officer's mind. A rescue mission would be dangerous and complex, requiring precise timing and overwhelming force to succeed. But leaving General Harrison in enemy hands was not an option. "Captain, you've done excellent work today," Colonel Davis finally said. "Get some rest. We'll take it from here." But as Sarah walked toward the debriefing room, her mind was already working on a different plan. She knew the enemy positions, understood their tactics, and had the flying skills necessary for a rescue attempt. More importantly, she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try to save the general who had placed his trust in her protection. The question wasn't whether she would attempt a rescue mission. The question was how she could pull it off against overwhelming odds with limited resources and time running out for General Harrison. Sarah spent the next 3 hours in debriefing sessions, going over every detail of the failed mission with intelligence officers and mission planners. Maps covered every surface of the briefing room, marked with enemy positions, patrol routes, and potential rescue scenarios. But despite all the planning and analysis, the conclusion was always the same. A conventional rescue mission would require more resources and time than they could afford. "Captain Mitchell, I understand your frustration," Colonel Davis said as the evening briefing concluded. "But we simply don't have the assets for an immediate rescue operation. Command is working on diplomatic channels to negotiate the general's release." Sarah knew that diplomatic negotiations could take weeks or months if they worked at all. By then, the enemy would have extracted every piece of valuable information from General Harrison and possibly moved him to a more secure location. The window for a successful rescue was closing rapidly. As the other officers filed out of the briefing room, Sarah remained behind, studying the aerial photographs and tactical maps. Her trained eyes picked out details that the intelligence analysts had missed. A small maintenance shed near the enemy compound that could provide cover for an infiltration team, a narrow valley that would allow low-altitude approach without detection, and most importantly, a pattern in the enemy guard rotations that created a brief window of vulnerability every 4 hours. "You're thinking about something dangerous, aren't you?" Sarah looked up to see Major Alex Rodriguez, the base's top helicopter pilot and her closest friend among the aircrew. Alex had been quietly observing from the doorway, his dark eyes showing the same determination that Sarah felt burning in her chest. "The general saved my brother's unit in Syria 2 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "Tommy would still be missing in action if General Harrison hadn't personally authorized the search and rescue operation that brought him home. I owe the man my family." Alex nodded, understanding. He knew about Tommy's capture and rescue, and he had seen the bond that existed between Sarah and the general. More than that, he understood the code that military pilots lived by. You never leave a fellow warrior behind, regardless of the personal cost. "What are you thinking?" Alex asked, closing the briefing room door behind him. Sarah pointed to the map. "Single aircraft, low-altitude approach through this valley. The enemy won't expect another solo mission so soon after the failed escort. I can use their overconfidence against them." "That's suicide, Sarah. You'd be flying into a hornet's nest with no backup and no support. Even if you somehow managed to extract the general, how would you get him out? Your F-16 is a single-seat fighter." Sarah had already thought about that problem. "I'd need a different aircraft, something with room for passengers and the ability to land in tight spaces." Alex studied the map more carefully, his pilot's mind working through the tactical challenges. "You're talking about using one of the A-10 Thunderbolts. They're tough enough to take ground fire, and they have enough space behind the pilot's seat for a passenger in an emergency. Can you get me access to one without going through official channels?" Alex was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks and benefits of what Sarah was proposing. As a major, he had enough authority to authorize aircraft maintenance and pilot training flights without attracting unwanted attention. But what Sarah was suggesting went far beyond bending regulations. "The A-10s are scheduled for night maintenance checks," Alex said slowly. "One of them might need an extended test flight to verify systems functionality. That kind of test flight could last several hours and cover a lot of territory. Sarah felt a surge of hope. What about weapons and fuel? Standard combat load for system testing. The maintainers wouldn't think twice about it. They spent the next hour going over every detail of the improvised rescue plan. The A-10 Thunderbolt was perfect for the mission, heavily armored, capable of precision strikes against ground targets, and rugged enough to operate from rough airstrips or even highway surfaces if necessary. The aircraft's twin engines would provide redundancy in case of battle damage, and its slow flight characteristics would allow Sarah to navigate the narrow valley approach route. Timing is critical, Sarah explained, pointing to the surveillance photos. Guard shift changes occur at midnight, 0400, 0800, and noon. The midnight change gives us the best cover of darkness, but it's also when they'll be most alert for rescue attempts. The 0400 shift change would be better, Alex suggested. Guards are tired, visibility is poor, and it's psychologically the lowest point of human alertness. Plus, you'd have dawn light for the extraction flight. Sarah agreed. The pre-dawn assault would maximize their chances of success while minimizing the risks to General Harrison, but that still left the question of how to locate and extract the general once she was on the ground. I'll need to go in on foot, Sarah said. The A-10 can provide close air support, but the actual rescue will require ground insertion. That's where I come in, Alex said with a grin. You'll need someone to keep the aircraft ready for immediate takeoff. Plus, I'm a better shot with a rifle than you are. Sarah wanted to object, knowing that she was already asking too much of her friend, but Alex's logic was sound. A two-person team would have much better odds of success than a solo operator, and Alex's combat experience in Afghanistan made him invaluable for ground operations. We'll need equipment, Sarah said, making a mental list. Night vision goggles, tactical radios, medical supplies in case the general is injured. I can requisition everything through normal training exercise channels, Alex assured her. Special operations units run practice missions all the time. No one will question routine equipment draws. They agreed to meet at the aircraft maintenance hangar at 0200 hours, giving them time to rest and gather the necessary equipment. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Alex placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You know this could end both our careers, even if we succeed, he said seriously. I know, but some things are more important than careers. Sarah spent the next few hours trying to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept racing through the mission plan, looking for potential problems and alternative solutions. The enemy would certainly increase security around General Harrison after her earlier attack, making infiltration even more dangerous. But they might also assume that no one would be foolish enough to attempt a second mission so soon. At midnight, Sarah quietly made her way to her quarters weapons locker and retrieved her personal sidearm and combat knife. She had purchased the knife during her first deployment, and it had become something of a good luck charm during dangerous missions. Tonight, she would need all the luck she could get. The maintenance hangar was dimly lit when Sarah arrived, with only a few technicians working on routine aircraft inspections. Alex was already there, dressed in standard flight gear and carrying a large equipment bag. He had somehow managed to requisition everything they needed without raising suspicions. The A-10 is fully fueled and armed, Alex whispered as they walked toward the aircraft. I told the crew chief it needed an extended systems check after the engine work yesterday. The A-10 Thunderbolt looked intimidating, even sitting still in the hangar. Its massive twin engines and distinctive nose-mounted cannon gave it an aggressive appearance that matched its reputation as a tank killer. But tonight, Sarah would be using the aircraft's precision capabilities against human targets. Did you file a flight plan? Sarah asked as they conducted their pre-flight inspection. Training area Echo 7, 4-hour duration, Alex replied. It's close enough to the border that we can reach the target area without raising questions about our route. As they climbed into the aircraft, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that preceded every combat mission. But this time, the stakes were personal. General Harrison wasn't just another military objective. He was a man who had shown kindness to her family and trust in her abilities. The A-10's engines spooled up with a distinctive whine that gradually increased to a powerful roar. Sarah went through her takeoff checklist methodically, knowing that any mistake could doom the mission before it even began. The aircraft was heavier than her usual F-16, but the controls responded smoothly to her inputs. "Tower, this is Thunder 07 requesting clearance for training area Echo 7, Sarah transmitted, using the call sign Alex had arranged. "Thunder 07, you are cleared for takeoff. Maintain heading 090 until clear of controlled airspace." The takeoff was smooth, and Sarah quickly settled into the rhythm of flying the unfamiliar aircraft. The A-10 felt solid and stable compared to her agile fighter, but it lacked the speed and maneuverability that had saved her life earlier that day. Tonight, she would need to rely on stealth and surprise rather than aerial combat skills. As they flew toward the border, Alex monitored radio frequencies and updated their navigation system with the latest intelligence information. The enemy had increased air patrols since the morning's incident, but their patterns were predictable and could be avoided with careful timing. "Crossing into hostile territory in 5 minutes, Alex announced. "All radio communications go to tactical frequencies from this point forward." Sarah descended to low altitude, using terrain features to mask their approach. The A-10's radar signature was larger than her F-16, but at treetop level, enemy radar systems would have difficulty tracking them through the ground clutter and mountainous terrain. The flight to the target area took 45 minutes of careful navigation through valleys and around known anti-aircraft sites. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart rate increased as they approached the point of no return. Once they began the actual rescue attempt, there would be no opportunity to abort the mission or call for backup. "Target area in sight," Alex reported, studying the terrain through night vision equipment. "I count 6 buildings in the compound with guard towers at the north and south corners." Sarah could see the compound clearly through her own night vision display. It looked exactly like the intelligence photographs, except for the additional security measures that had been added since General Harrison's capture. Extra guards patrolled the perimeter, and several vehicles were positioned for rapid response to any rescue attempt. "There," Alex pointed to a small building set apart from the others. "That has to be where they're holding him. It's the only structure with bars on the windows and extra guards." Sarah studied the building and its surroundings, looking for the best approach route. A small maintenance shed provided cover within 50 meters of the target building, close enough for a quick assault, but far enough to avoid immediate detection during their insertion. "I'm going to put us down in that clearing about half a kilometer south of the compound," Sarah decided. "We'll approach on foot and use the pre-dawn darkness for concealment." "What about extraction?" "I'll bring the A-10 in for ground support once we have the general. The aircraft can lay down suppressing fire while we make our way to the pickup point." Alex nodded, understanding the plan despite its obvious risks. They would have only minutes to execute the rescue before enemy reinforcements arrived. Everything depended on speed, surprise, and a substantial amount of luck. Sarah brought the A-10 down in a small clearing surrounded by trees, using the aircraft's short landing capability to touch down in a space that would have been impossible for most military aircraft. The engines spooled down to idle as she and Alex prepared for the ground phase of their mission. "Remember, we go in fast and quiet," Sarah whispered as they gathered their equipment. "Neutralize the guards silently if possible, grab the general, and get out before anyone knows we're there. And if things go wrong..." Sarah checked her sidearm one final time. "Then we fight our way out and hope the A-10's armor is as good as they say it is." As they prepared to leave the relative safety of their aircraft, Both pilots knew that the next hour would determine whether General Harrison lived or died, and whether their own careers and lives would survive the unauthorized rescue attempt. But neither hesitated as they stepped into the darkness, driven by duty and loyalty to a fellow warrior who had trusted them with his life. The forest was eerily quiet as Sarah and Alex moved through the shadows toward the enemy compound. Their night vision goggles turned the darkness into a green-tinted world of sharp contrasts, where every branch and rock stood out with crystal clarity. They had rehearsed the approach route during their flight planning, but moving on foot through unfamiliar territory while carrying full combat gear proved more challenging than expected. Sarah led the way, her combat training from survival school serving her well in the dense undergrowth. Every few minutes, they paused to listen for enemy patrols or guard movements. But the night remained silent, except for the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush. The enemy's overconfidence was working in their favor so far. "Compound perimeter in sight," Alex whispered through their tactical radio. "2 guards visible at the main gate, another one walking the fence line." Sarah could see the target building clearly now, a small concrete structure with barred windows and a single door guarded by 2 armed soldiers. Light spilled from several windows in the main buildings, indicating that the enemy was maintaining a high state of alert despite the late hour. "I count at least 8 guards total," Sarah observed. "More than the intelligence estimate. They're definitely taking this seriously," Alex agreed. "But I don't see any roving patrols outside the compound perimeter." That was both good news and bad news. The absence of external patrols made their approach easier, but it also suggested that the enemy was concentrating their forces inside the compound where General Harrison was being held. Any rescue attempt would face fierce resistance once it began. Sarah studied the guard patterns for several minutes, timing their movements and looking for windows of opportunity. The perimeter guards followed predictable routes, but their timing overlapped in ways that would make silent infiltration extremely difficult. "We're going to need a distraction," Sarah decided. "Something to draw their attention away from the target building long enough for us to get inside." Alex checked his equipment bag and pulled out several small explosive charges intended for demolition work. "I can rig these to blow on the far side of the compound. The noise and flash will pull the guards away from our objective." "How long do you need to set them up?" "Give me 10 minutes to work my way around to the north side. When you see the explosions, move fast. You'll have maybe 2 minutes before they figure out it's a diversion." Sarah nodded and checked her watch. 0330 hours. The guard shift change would occur in 30 minutes, potentially adding more complications to their mission. They needed to move now while they still had darkness on their side. Alex disappeared into the forest, moving with surprising stealth for such a large man. Sarah remained in position, watching the compound and refining her approach route to the target building. She identified several points of cover that would allow her to move from the fence line to the building entrance without being spotted by the guards. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah's mind wandered briefly to her brother Tommy, wondering what he would think of her current situation. Tommy had always said that Sarah was too reckless for her own good, but he had also been the first person to congratulate her when she earned her pilot's wings. A series of bright flashes lit up the northern edge of the compound, followed immediately by the sharp crack of explosions. Shouts erupted from the guard towers as soldiers rushed toward the apparent attack, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Sarah was already moving before the echoes died away. She cut through the compound fence using bolt cutters Alex had provided, then sprinted toward the target building while the guards were distracted. Her heart pounded as she covered the open ground, expecting to hear the crack of rifle fire at any moment. But the diversion had worked perfectly. The building guards had left their posts to investigate the explosions, leaving only a single sentry near the entrance. Sarah approached from his blind side, using hand-to-hand combat techniques to render him unconscious without raising an alarm. The building door was locked. but Sarah's demolition training included lockpicking and forced entry techniques. Within seconds, she had the door open and was moving through the darkened interior. Her night vision revealed a narrow hallway with several doors, each one secured with heavy deadbolts. "General Harrison?" she called softly, moving from door to door. "Here," came a weak response from the third room she checked. Sarah found General Harrison sitting on a crude wooden bench, his uniform torn and his face showing signs of interrogation. But his eyes were alert and determined, showing the same leadership spirit that had made him legendary among the troops. "Captain Mitchell?" the general asked in amazement. "What are you doing here?" "Keeping my promise to get you home safely, sir," Sarah replied while cutting through his restraints with her combat knife. "Can you move?" "I'm banged up but functional," Harrison assured her. "They've been trying to get information about our defensive positions, but I haven't told them anything useful." Sarah helped the general to his feet, noting that he favored his left leg but could walk without assistance. Outside, she could hear the guards returning from investigating Alex's diversion, their voices angry and confused. "We need to move now," Sarah said. "My partner is waiting with extraction aircraft, but we have to reach the pickup point before enemy reinforcements arrive." They moved through the building toward the rear exit, hoping to avoid the returning guards. But as they reached the back door, Sarah heard footsteps approaching from multiple directions. The enemy had realized that the explosions were a diversion and was now conducting a systematic search of the compound. "This way," Sarah whispered, leading General Harrison toward a small window that opened onto the compound's rear area. The opening was narrow, but both of them managed to squeeze through just as armed soldiers entered the building behind them. The compound's rear area provided some concealment, but Sarah knew they had only minutes before the search expanded beyond the buildings. She activated her tactical radio and transmitted a coded message to Alex, indicating that the extraction phase was beginning. "Phoenix to Thunder. Package recovered. Moving to primary extraction point," she whispered into the radio. "Thunder copies, Phoenix. Be advised, you have multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Suggest alternate extraction point." Sarah cursed silently. The enemy was bringing in reinforcements faster than anticipated, cutting off their planned escape route. She would need to improvise a new plan while keeping General Harrison safe from the intensifying search. "General, how's your climbing ability?" she asked, looking at a communications tower that rose above the compound's buildings. "Better than my running," Harrison replied with a slight smile. "Lead the way, Captain." They made their way to the base of the tower while enemy soldiers continued searching the buildings. Sarah's plan was risky but simple. Climb high enough to get clear sight lines for Alex's air support, then rappel down using climbing gear once the A-10 had suppressed the enemy forces. The climb up the tower was exhausting, especially for General Harrison with his injured leg. But years of military fitness training served them well, and within 10 minutes they had reached a platform about 50 feet above the compound. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the full scope of their problem. Enemy vehicles were approaching from 3 different directions, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like advancing searchlights. At least 40 soldiers were now involved in the search, and several were beginning to look upward toward possible elevated hiding spots. "Thunder, this is Phoenix," Sarah transmitted. "We're at the communication tower in the center of the compound. Request immediate air support on multiple vehicle concentrations. Phoenix, Thunder is inbound. Identify your exact position with infrared strobe." Sarah activated a small infrared beacon that would be invisible to the naked eye, but clearly visible to Alex's night vision equipment. Within moments, she heard the distinctive sound of the A-10's twin engines approaching at low altitude. "Phoenix, I have your position marked. Hang on tight." The A-10 Thunderbolt appeared over the compound, like an avenging angel, its massive cannon already spitting fire toward the approaching enemy vehicles. The 30mm rounds tore through truck engines and scattered infantry formations, creating chaos and confusion among the enemy forces. But the enemy response was quicker and more organized than Sarah had hoped. Anti-aircraft fire began reaching up toward Alex's aircraft, forcing him to break off his attack runs and seek cover behind the surrounding hills. "Phoenix, I'm taking heavy ground fire," Alex reported. "Can't maintain close support without risking aircraft loss." Sarah realized they would need to reach the extraction point on foot after all. The communication tower provided temporary safety, but they couldn't remain there indefinitely. Enemy reinforcements would eventually bring ladder trucks or other equipment to reach their position. "General, we're going down the back side of this tower," Sarah decided. "I'll rappel first and provide covering fire while you follow." "Negative, Captain," General Harrison said firmly. "I'll go first. If something happens to me, you can still make it out alone. But if something happens to you, I'm stuck up here with no extraction plan." Sarah wanted to argue, but the general's logic was sound. She helped him set up the rappelling gear and watched as he descended the tower's backside with surprising agility for a man his age. Decades of military service had kept Harrison in better shape than most officers his rank. When the general reached the ground safely, Sarah followed quickly. They found themselves in a small storage area behind the compound's main buildings, temporarily concealed from the searching enemy forces. "Thunder, Phoenix! We're mobile and moving toward alternate extraction point Echo," Sarah transmitted. "Phoenix, Thunder, I'll provide cover fire and meet you there in 10 minutes. The alternate extraction point was a small clearing about half a kilometer from the compound, reachable through a creek bed that provided natural concealment. Sarah and General Harrison moved as quickly as possible while remaining hidden from enemy patrols. The journey through the creek bed was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and hidden obstacles threatening to cause injuries at every step. But the sound of running water helped mask their movements, and the high banks provided cover from searching flashlights. "Contact rear," General Harrison suddenly called out. Sarah spun around to see enemy soldiers approaching their position from the direction of the compound. Someone had spotted their escape route, and now they were being pursued by at least 6 armed soldiers who had the advantage of local terrain knowledge. "Move to the clearing," Sarah ordered. "I'll hold them off." She took position behind a large boulder and began returning fire at the pursuing soldiers. Her aim was hampered by the darkness and her need to conserve ammunition, but she managed to slow their advance enough for General Harrison to reach the extraction point. The sound of the A-10's engines grew louder as Alex brought the aircraft in for landing in the small clearing. The airplane's landing lights illuminated the area, making it easier for Sarah to navigate, but also revealing their position to any enemy forces in the vicinity. "Phoenix, Thunder is on deck. Move to aircraft now." Sarah laid down suppressing fire while backing toward the clearing where General Harrison was already climbing into the A-10's cramped rear compartment. Enemy bullets whined overhead, some coming close enough that she could hear their passage through the air. As she reached the aircraft, Alex was already advancing the throttles for takeoff. Sarah dove through the open canopy just as enemy soldiers emerged from the tree line and began firing at the departing aircraft. Several bullets struck the A-10's armored hull, but the aircraft's legendary durability lived up to its reputation. Alex pulled back on the stick and the Thunderbolt clawed its way into the air, carrying its precious cargo away from the enemy forces below. "Is everyone secure back there?" Alex called over the engine noise. "General Harrison is bruised but stable," Sarah replied, checking their passenger's condition. "Nice flying, Thunder. Just returning the favor, Phoenix." As they climbed away from the compound, Sarah could see enemy vehicles converging on the clearing they had just vacated. The timing had been closer than she cared to think about, but they had successfully completed their unauthorized rescue mission. The flight back to friendly territory took an hour, during which General Harrison provided a detailed briefing on his capture and the intelligence information the enemy had been seeking. His knowledge of defensive positions and troop movements could have given the enemy a decisive advantage in future battles. "Captain Mitchell, Major Rodriguez," the general said as they approached their home base. "What you've done tonight goes far beyond the call of duty. I won't forget this." Sarah smiled, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Just doing our job, sir. Though I suspect we'll have some explaining to do when we land." Indeed, the base was fully alert when they touched down, with security teams and senior officers waiting on the tarmac. The unauthorized use of military aircraft for a combat mission would normally result in court-martial proceedings, regardless of the outcome. But as General Harrison emerged from the aircraft and saluted the waiting officers, Sarah could see the relief and admiration in their faces. Sometimes, she reflected, doing the right thing was more important than following regulations. "Captain Mitchell, Major Rodriguez," Colonel Davis said as they were escorted to debriefing. "You're both in serious trouble, but you're also heroes." As dawn broke over the airbase, Sarah looked back at the A-10 Thunderbolt that had carried them through their dangerous mission. The aircraft showed multiple bullet holes and combat damage, but it had brought them home safely. Just like General Harrison, some things were tougher than they appeared on the surface. The debriefing sessions that followed would be lengthy and intense, with questions about authorization, rules of engagement, and command structure. But Sarah knew that she had made the right choice. When a fellow warrior needed help, you answered the call, regardless of the personal cost. General Harrison's successful rescue would ultimately lead to the peace negotiations that ended the conflict 6 months later. The information he carried, and his personal involvement in the diplomatic process, proved crucial to achieving a lasting agreement between the warring sides. For Sarah and Alex, the unauthorized mission resulted in formal reprimands and temporary grounding. But it also earned them the respect of their fellow pilots and the gratitude of a nation that understood the value of loyalty and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Years later, when Sarah had risen to become a squadron commander herself, she would tell young pilots that sometimes the most important missions were the ones that didn't appear on any official orders. The mission to rescue General Harrison had taught her that true leadership meant taking responsibility for others, even when the cost seemed too high to bear. The small medal that General Harrison personally presented to her was never officially recorded, but Sarah treasured it more than any decoration she received through normal channels. It represented something that couldn't be measured in regulations or protocols: the bond between warriors who had faced death together and emerged victorious through courage, skill, and determination. In the end, Sarah's decision to turn back and attempt the rescue proved that sometimes a lone pilot really could make a difference. Against overwhelming odds with limited resources and no official support, she had demonstrated that the values of duty, honor, and loyalty were more than just words in a military handbook. The enemy fighters she had outflown were impressive, but they paled in comparison to the internal battle she had fought between following orders and following her conscience. By choosing to risk everything for a fellow warrior, Sarah had honored the best traditions of military service and shown that true heroism lies not in individual glory, but in the willingness to sacrifice for others.